G'day from Australia. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. My name is Ashley Davis. Welcome to my coding live stream. I'm continuing development of my Kanban board extension for Visual Studio Code. In the last session I started work on the editing capabilities of the Kanban board, and in between then and now I've done some more work on that, and we're going to review those changes first. But the real theme of today is refactoring, something I really enjoy when I'm coding. We're also going to be integrating a dependency injection framework, so that's going to be pretty cool. Now, when I first started this project, for convenience and to get started quickly, I started with someone else's code repo. That was like a template for building a Visual Studio Code extension that included a React-based UI. Now that saved me a lot of time getting started. It saved me a lot of learning as well, like figuring out how to kind of put that stuff together. It just worked, so that was great. So the nature of this project, this Visual Studio Code extension that I'm creating, is that it's been involved on top of someone else's project. Now, today I'm planning to make it mine, so to speak. So I'm going to refactor the code, and it's going to look something, in the end, it's going to look something more like what I would have created from scratch. Now, before we get into it, I've got a big announcement to make. My book, Bootstrapping Microservices, it's hit print. So I now have the dead tree format of my book published. Very happy with that. If you're into microservices, if you want to learn microservices, this is a practical and project-based guide. It'll take you all the way through from creating a single microservice to developing and testing multiple services locally, and then to creating a Kubernetes cluster in the cloud and publishing your application to that so that it can be accessible by your customers. It's just a hand-holding all the way through some quite complicated technology, but we only scrape the surface, only the stuff that you really need to get your application into production. So please look it up, Bootstrapping Microservices. As I'm coding today, I'm going to do my best to explain what I'm doing and while I'm doing it. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is AshleyDavis75. So this is the code repository for the project. It's available on my GitHub, Ashley Davis. Look up Taskboard VS Code extension. You can clone it from here. You can download it from here. You can fork it from here if you want to make changes yourself. I would love to have someone who's watching this live stream come and contribute to my project. That would be fantastic. There's some basic instructions there for getting started. If you have any problems getting started with it, I should actually enable issues. Oh, there are issues here. So you can actually go to issues and create a new issue here if you have any problems getting started with this repository. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Ask me questions on Twitter. Now, if you want to, a lot has happened before now. If you want to find out what's happened, please look up my YouTube channel. That's the Data Wrangler on YouTube. If you look at playlists, you will find the full playlist for coding livestream Taskboard. And a bunch has happened before today, so we're getting towards the end of this, and probably only going to be like another 2 or 3 weeks before I get this published on the Visual Studio Code Marketplace, and that means everyone's going to be able to install it and use it in Visual Studio Code. Now, in case you haven't been following along, I'm going to give you a quick demo of where it's at now. I'm just going to start Visual Studio Code from my working directory there. Now this is the code for the extension. I've got it all set up so I can hit F5. I'm just hitting F5 in Visual Studio Code there. Don't need that. So this is basically, if it's doing what I hope it's doing. Okay, it's appears to be moving forward. So I hit F5. I've got it all set up so that I can start a new instance of Visual Studio Code with this extension loaded in it by hitting F5. At the moment, what it's doing, you can see here in the terminal. Let me zoom in a bit. You can see that it's building the React web page. So this extension has what's called a web view. And inside that web view, there is a React web application that is going to be rendering the Kanban board. Cool. Now it's compiling the code for the extension itself. So it's built using Webpack. It's built the React application that runs inside the web view in the extension. Now it's built the code. Now it's starting the new Visual Studio Code extension. Now once I'm here, I go Control-Shift-P, open Kanban board. And then I will move that just across to the side there so we can see it side by side. So what this does is it allows you to select a Markdown file that is basically a Markdown representation of a Kanban board or a to-do list or something, and it renders that in the Kanban board on the side here. And this is very exciting. What I've done since the last live stream is I've gone through and implemented quite a few of the editing capabilities of it. I think in the last live stream I'd just done one, but now I've done a heap. So you can do things like I can edit a lane, new name. You can see over here on the left that's updated the Markdown file. Can't edit. Oh, I can. I can change what's in it. I don't know if this works actually. I didn't think you could do this. So I'm renaming a card. No, that doesn't work yet. So I didn't actually think you could do that with React Trello. So that's one thing I've done actually is I've upgraded to the latest version of React Trello, which is available on NPM, and it includes the ability to edit cards. But I just haven't wired that into the Markdown yet. What else can we do here? We can add a new lane. You can see at the end here that that's added it to the Markdown. We can add new cards. Now we can also delete lanes and cards. I won't worry about showing you that. What's missing, what hasn't been done yet, I may not get to it today, but I will get to it soon, is the ability to drag. So that doesn't do anything yet. Dragging lanes and dragging cards, that doesn't do anything yet. So we're close. There's a few more editing capabilities that need to be added to this before it's ready. And this is a really cool point that we're at here, because normally when I give this demo at the start of the live stream, it's like the prototype code. What you're viewing here now is like the real kind of test-driven development code, that I've written using TDD in past live streams. It's all integrated and it's working. Well, there's a few things left to be done, of course, but pretty happy to be at this point. So let's get out of that. Now, what I like to do at the start of every session of coding is just run my tests to make sure they're still working. So I run npm test. That's running jest. And it's going to run through a bunch of tests just to make sure that, in the last session, I didn't break anything or I didn't leave anything broken. Not that that's a problem, of course. Sometimes I purposefully leave tests broken so that when I come back to it and run my tests, I know what I'm working on next. I've got the next test that I've got to fix. But all my tests are working, so that's cool. Now, one thing that happened between live streams is I made a change. I made an update to React Trello, and I just want to show you what that was. So this is the Git repo for React Trello. It's also available on NPM. It's got a great storybook set up here. So you can actually kind of, select all the different kinds of features you're interested in and have a play with them and see how they work. So that's that. This is React Trello on GitHub. Now, the problem I had with it is that when you create a new lane, it wasn't generating an ID for the lane. Now, it was actually that. When you create a new card, it was generating an ID for a card, and I delved into the code for React Trello, and I found that it was just a fairly simple change that I needed to make in order to move where the ID or the unique ID for the lane is allocated, so that it actually gets passed through to the event handler, so that when my code is notified about the new lane, I can actually pull out that unique ID. So, When I was searching for this, I went looking through the issues in React Trello, and I actually found that someone had already logged this issue, this person here, and that was in April in 2020. So add lane is missing an ID. I came back and I said it's also an issue for me, and I kind of I clarified the way I think it should work, and then I fixed it. I forked the code for React Trello. I made a change, I committed it, I pushed it, and then I submitted a pull request. So I added a comment here that links in the pull request, and pretty quickly, like within a day, it was merged, and a new version of React Trello was released. So that was really cool that I made a change and it came out pretty much straight away, and I could start using that. So what I did to fix this though is I had to initially I went in here and I cloned my own copy of React Trello, and then I copied the whole code for it into my project, into the code for my extension, and then I linked up to that, and then I started playing with it. This was a simple fix. Luckily, I didn't have to spend a lot of time on this, so I pretty quickly found it. So I'd made the change and I tested it in my own project. Then what I did is I came up here and I forked it. So anyone on GitHub, can fork anyone else's public code repositories and potentially contribute to them. So I forked it, and then I came back here and I cloned my fork of it, and then I just used Git the normal way. I did commits. I pushed my code up, and then what I had to do to get that submitted is I had to come over here to pull requests. From here you can create a new pull request, and it will basically figure out what you've changed in your fork of the project and submit a request to the owner of the original repository to integrate that. And so this is what that looks like. This is pull request 429. It says on the right there. So this is my fix that adds the lane ID to this on-lane add event, and I've described it here. And just the commentary there on what happened and how it got integrated. But you can actually see the commits if you go into the commits tab here. I've done one commit, and if you drill down to that, you can see the files that I've changed. So they're using this library UID v1, UID, but with the v1 function. And so you can see here in this function add lane, they were allocating the ID there, but that's too late. That's too late because the payload basically that's sent to the on-lane add event handler is sent at a higher level. So I basically took this chunk of code out. I took it out and I moved it to kind of further back in this process. So at the moment, basically, where it's triggering this initial event on add, instead of just having a payload here with the title of the new lane, it's actually adding the ID and the title. And so it gets passed into this odd and function, which ultimately gets passed into the on-lane add event, which gets invoked in my code. So that's how I know that there's a new lane added to the Kanban board. And putting the ID here makes sure that that ID gets through to my code, which is what I needed. So I just thought that was a really cool aside that I got that in and it was accepted so quickly, and I'm now using that. So thank you so much to this guy, RC Dexter, whose real name I do not know, but thanks so much to him for for making React Trello in the first place, but also for accepting my pull request so quickly. Really happy with that. Now let's have a look at what's happened in the extension code since the last live stream. I'm just going to do this through the GitHub page, so you can do this yourself. Let's just go back and make sure you know how to do that. So I'm just at the GitHub repository for the Taskboard VS Code extension. On the right here, you can see the commits. So the commits is like the complete history of everything that's changed in this code repository. I can see this information from the command line as well. If I do git log, I think. So I can go through all that information, the complete history of this repository, even going back to before I forked it from the original repository. So if you go back far enough, it'll be someone else who's put this all together. But I mean, that's a little bit hard to read from the command line, but much easier to read if you come into the web page here. You can also get to this in Sourcetree. So I'm in Sourcetree here, which is you can get online some software for using Git and Mercurial as well. But you've got the complete history here, and you've got it locally as well. So if you're not online, say, if you're writing code on your if you're writing code on your commute to work, like I used to do, and you don't want to connect to Wi-Fi hotspot, which you probably would do these days, you can work entirely offline here. But we're online, so I'm looking at the commits here. These are the ones that I'm interested in at the moment. Is the update to React Trello, so that includes the PR, and this is the real one. So this commit, I have come to a big change really in the way I've been doing things, and it's kind of like a crucial realization. Is that if you've been watching to date, you'll know I've been using paths into the abstract syntax tree, the AST of the Markdown, to be able to kind of update the Markdown without having to kind of reserialize Markdown from scratch. I realized that using abstract or these AST paths was going to make my life really difficult in a short while. And the reason is because that if you move things around in a board, like if you move around a lane to another spot, or you move cards to other spots, or even between lanes, you're going to have to go through and rewrite in a lot of these paths. So ultimately, I think now, in hindsight, they're just going to make things much more difficult when I get to that point where I'm kind of rewiring and moving things around in the Kanban board. and I got to that realization because I was working on the editing code. And so this is quite a big commit. It's probably the biggest commit I've done so far, where I add a bunch of editing code, but then to not have to kind of go into these difficult realms of rewriting these AST paths, I had to gut the AST paths from the project and find a different way to do this. And also, I also realized, when it came to adding new lanes and new cards, and when you add a new card, React Trello gives you the ID that it allocates a GUID. So React Trello is working with GUIDs like as its IDs. And I was working with AST paths as my IDs, and they're not really compatible. And I had to kind of change the way I was doing it to conform to the way React Trello works. And of course, when you create a new lane in React Trello, it allocates a GUID as an ID for as well. That's, exposing that GUID, exposing that ID for the lane was the change that I made to React Trello. But let's look at the diffs here. So I was using the Ramda library. So this is the package JSON files. I was using the Ramda library and its dependencies to work with the AST paths. I don't need Ramda anymore. There's nothing I need to use Ramda for, so I've stripped it out of my project. That's not saying Ramda's bad or anything. I think Ramda's still really cool, and I'll still be looking for opportunities to use it in the future. But I don't need it in this project at the moment. Now, in the React application itself, I've added a bunch of handlers for my editing operations. So the handler for when a lane is added, and it sends a message giving all the relevant details about the new lane from the web view back to the extension. I've got a handler for on-lane delete. It's sending that message again. All the relevant details about the lane to delete through to the Visual Studio Code extension. You notice I've got some console logs here. I'll have to remove them later. But this is how when I was figuring out how to do this, that was my first step. Is I went to the docs for React Trello. I looked at the sort of signature for this, so I could put that in. And then the first thing I did was I put in some console logging, and I went in and I actually played with my test version of the Trello of the Kanban board. So I could see these console logs coming out, so I know what data they're being passed, and I know what data I'm dealing with. I've got on-lane update, where I'm sending all the information about the lane that was edited. At the moment, it's only the title that's being edited. I've got an event handler here for when a lane is dragged and when it's moved in the board, and again, sending the information across. I've got an event handler here for when a card is added, and you know the drill. It's sent across the extension. On card delete, so a card has been deleted from the board, and we're sending that information across to the extension. So what I opted for here, and I think I'd kind of opted for this in the maybe like 2 sessions ago in the live stream, is that what originally what I was going to do here was send the entire data back to the extension, but instead what I'm doing is I'm just sending back, you know, like kind of edit commands, update commands. So it's what it results in is a simple packet of JSON data being sent from the web view to the extension, which are running in separate processes. They're not running in the same process. So this is a message from basically from one process to another, and it's just minimal. It's just small. I didn't want large swathes of unnecessary data being transmitted across. So I've optimized that preemptively because it's just, you know, it just makes a lot of sense to do that. I've got an event handler here for when a card is finished being dragged and it's being sent across. I've got an event here when a card gets clicked. I don't think I'm going to use that now. Like what I was going to do previously was open a modal dialog like Trello to allow the card to be edited, and that was going to be a bit of UI work that I had to do. But as we saw before, you can directly edit the description of a card within React Trello now. So I don't think I'm going to need this, but I'm going to have to come back to that later. Now we're moving into the code for the extension. I've removed Ramda. I've removed any AST paths. I'm going to come back in the code and show you how this works, but yeah, it's a little bit too complicated to go through this in the diff here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the code and sort of review how that works in the code directly in there. So we're back in Visual Studio Code now. And we're going to look at extension.ts, which is the main code file in the extension. So one thing I'm doing now is I'm passing through a bunch of options to configure the Markdown serialization. That's just to get it, you know, the Markdown that gets saved out after you've edited your Kanban board, to get it looking like what I want. In the future, I plan to have this be a configuration file loaded from the project. So anyone who's using the extension will be able to customize it according to their own needs. Now, here's the event handler that gets that basically gets invoked when the current active document in Visual Studio Code is changed. And if it's not a markdown, we're just ignoring it. But if it is a markdown, we're pulling out the text. We're parsing that to the abstract syntax tree. We're converting that to board data. So I'm going to have to show you what I've done in this function in a moment. But basically, I've introduced a new sort of data set, a new data structure that encapsulates you know, the board, which is the abstract syntax tree for the board, the data for it, and also a mapping. So instead of using the paths to basically allow you to find a node in the abstract syntax tree when you want to update it, there's some lookup tables in here that basically map from a lane ID or a card ID to the nodes in the abstract syntax tree that represent the lane or the card. I'll drill down into this function in a second and show you that. So what is passed across, this post message here is what sends the Kanban board data across to the web view. What's passed across is just the minimal board data. So I'm not passing across the abstract syntax tree. I'm not passing across any of the maps. I don't need any of that to be in the web view. All I need is the minimal data set, which is just the data for the Kanban board to be sent across, so that can be plugged into React Trello that's running in the web view. Now I'm just going to select this function here and hit F12. That's a great way just to drill down to a function to see what's inside it. So what I've added here is I've added this iBoard interface. So that didn't exist last time. So it's got the original board data. So that's the Kanban board data that we know and love from previous live streams. Also the Markdown abstract syntax tree that we've been working with for many sessions now. These are new. So these are lookup tables for converting a card ID. So basically when a card or a lane is updated, The ID for that lane or card is sent, is given to me by React Trello. It then gets passed from the web view into the back to the extension, and the extension can then do a lookup and actually find what markdown, what nodes in the abstract syntax tree that these card or lane come from, so that they can be edited, and then we can then serialize the markdown back to the file. And the whole reason we go through this complicated, convoluted approach is because I don't want to lose any user data. So there is going to be, in a markdown file, there could be, it's very free form and flexible, and there are plenty of opportunities in there to have data in there that doesn't conform to the Kanban board format. So if we just naively converted markdown to Kanban board and back again, then we'd definitely wind up losing user data that was in the markdown, and that's not acceptable. So instead, we keep the abstract syntax tree in memory, and as it's being edited, in React Trello, we're applying those edits directly to the AST, so we're not losing anything. We've still got all the original data in the AST, and then when it comes time to kind of write that back to the Markdown, we're not going from Kanban board data back to Markdown. We're going from abstract syntax tree back to the Markdown text. So hopefully that'll make sense. It's complicated and convoluted. I understand that, but it's necessary that we do not lose user data. So it's absolutely essential. So I've got a bunch of changes I'd made to all these editing functions here, like adding a new lane, removing a lane, editing a task name, bunch of updates to these. But what it boils down to is, let's look at this for example. So we want to edit the name of a card. One of the things I want to do when I refactor is get the terminology right. So when I first started this project, I was calling them tasks. React Trello calls them cards. So now it's like confusing, because in some places I call them tasks, in some places I call them cards. So this is editing a card, and I'm going to change the terminology soon. That is going to be part of the refactor. But what we get here is the ID coming through. And then we use that ID, we pass that into the card lookup table, the card map, to get back the AST node for the task. We then have to drill down, because the text for the title of the card is sort of buried a little bit further down the abstract syntax tree. So we're pulling out the sub node, and then we're plugging in the new name to the value. So that's how we basically make a surgical update to this abstract syntax tree, given the ID of a card or a lane. And that's pretty much where we're at. I don't think there's anything else I need to go over. That's just an example of the kind of changes that I made last week. Had to update a bunch of tests. There's a few things there that I'm not really testing for anymore. I've kind of got those on my to-do list to fix. But in general, there's a lot more tests to do anyway, because I haven't even tested edge cases or bad data and stuff like that. So there's more I've got to test to try and break my code, and then be able to fix it and make sure it can gracefully handle any odd situations. Anyway, let's get down to the real theme of this live session, and let's do some refactoring. So the first thing I want to do is, we've got all these separate functions, and they're all related to this new interface I've added, iBoard. I'm gonna wrap these all up into a Typescript class. And that's just going to help keep everything together, make it a little bit more elegant, and it's just more akin to how I would normally code if I kind of wasn't, just evolving from the prototype. Basically, I slapped together a prototype on someone else's project. I don't necessarily. I'm very thankful for having that project to start with. I don't necessarily agree with the way they coded it. And also my own coding has been somewhat sloppy, given that I during the prototyping phase, I rapidly rushed through it just to see if this project was feasible. And since then I've been doing, TDD and refactoring the code, making it nicer. And so that's what I'm doing more of today. So what I want to do, I've got this interface. I better make sure my tests are running. So I'm gonna run my tests in watch mode. Hey, I'm gonna run my tests in watch mode, and that means whenever I change the code, Jest is automatically going to rerun and execute my tests. And that way, while I'm working, what I'm aiming to do here is change the code to improve it, or to improve the structure and design of it. I'm just forcing it to run all tests at the moment. I just hit the A key anyway. I just want to see that all 24 tests are passing. But as I'm refactoring my code and improving the design of it and the structure of it and that kind of thing, I want to keep coming back here and make sure I can make my tests pass. Because I mean, at the end of the day, it's really hard to do refactoring without automated testing. I mean, it doesn't even matter for this project, right? In truth, this project's almost done. I don't really need to refactor this project. I kind of like refactoring. I just want to do it. And I just want to show how it's done as well in the live stream. And it's going to make my life easier. I think, anything I do in the future, if I can refactor this to get it looking the way I want, it's going to make the job easier in the future. It's maybe not technically necessary, but whenever you do refactoring, you've got to make sure it's well tested. And that's easiest done if you've got your unit tests or any kind of integration tests or anything really. Of course, you can refactor and test manually, but then, when we refactor, we're going to be prone to breaking code. So we need all the help we can get because, it's easy to miss problems. And we don't want those problems getting to our customers. Now, this extension isn't published yet, so technically I don't have any customers either, so it's not a big issue. It's not a big issue yet. But if you're working as a developer on a project for a company, don't just go and refactor for the hell of it. Like you're going to end up breaking something, and your team or your boss is not going to be very happy with you. So make sure if you're going to do refactoring, make sure that the people around you are on board with it, and make sure that you've got adequate testing. It can be automatic, it can be manual. It doesn't really matter. Just you got to make sure you've got adequate testing, test plans, whatever in place, so that when you break things, you can get them. You can get them working again. You can know about it. So I'm going to add a Typescript class that's going to be called board. No surprises there. It's going to implement this iBoard interface, not board data, but the iBoard interface. And now, effectively, what I want to do is all these functions here that are separate. I'm just instead of passing the board in as a separate parameter here like that, I'm just going to wrap them all up, encapsulate them in this class, and then I don't need that parameter. That parameter is just implied. Now, I'm actually a fan of functional programming in terms of, no side effects and, the determinism that's included. I love that stuff. I do like to apply functional programming principles to my coding. But I'm also, like an old school object-oriented fan, within certain limits. And so that's why I like working in TypeScript, because you can make these interfaces, you can make these classes. Now I'm just moving, if I can. I've just moved this code up into the board class. Or have I? No, I haven't. But I've indented it, so that's a good sign. I'm just going to move that curly bracket down the end. So now I've moved all these functions inside the board class. Now it's going to complain, partially because I haven't implemented all this stuff here. So I am just going to literally just copy that down and implement it here. So there's no initializer. It's going to complain about no initializers, but I'm going to fix the issues with these functions first, so we don't have to export any of these things, and we don't have to have a function keyword. So what I'm going to, there's no other functions here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a global search and replace in this file. I'm going to replace this export function with nothing. Now you've got to be very careful when you do this, because if this is going to change every function in this file, which is what I want it to do. But if you're in another kind of code file, just be careful it's not what you want to do, because you can easily kind of, cause a problem there. But I'll show you how to get out of that anyway, right? So I'm just doing a replace all. So that's the first thing I need to do. Now, if I'd done that and it was a mistake and I want to undo it, obviously at the moment I could just hit, Control Z on my keyboard to do the undo. But if I wasn't able to do that because I'd restarted Visual Studio Code, if I wanted to back out of this change, this is what source control is meant for. So I've got this change in my working directory. It shows me the change there. Like I could literally, in Sourcetree, I can right click on it and I can discard it and reset it back to the way it was. At the command prompt, what I could do is I could do a git reset hard, and that would get me back to the last revision. So this is an argument. This is another argument for doing small commits. If you do small commits at any stage, if you mess something up, you can go and do this git reset and get it back to where it was. Now, the syntax of functions in TypeScript means I need to have a colon there after the field name. I don't think there's any way that I can do a search and replace to do this one. So that's cool. The other thing I'm aiming to do here is when I'm converting Markdown AST to a board. Actually, this function possibly still wants to be. Let's just still make that external. So I'm just going to put that back to the way it was, because this is the thing. I'm thinking this is the function that creates the board in the first place, right? So I'm just putting back the way it was. It's returning an iBoard. That's okay. That's still what I want it to do. It's just that that's going to be an instance of this board class shortly. Now for all these other functions here, I'm going to get rid of the board parameter. So this is the implied parameter. It's going to be the this object, if you know what that is. Now I just want to initialize, I need to initialize these things here basically. I can just do that in line. And I'm basically just going to replicate what I've got here. I'm just copying that up here just temporarily just so I can see that. The board data is just simply some empty lanes. Is it going to work? Oh, sorry, that's meant to be an array. Cool. The Markdown AST, that's going to be assigned. That's going to be. I need to pass that in a constructor basically. So that's going to be parsed externally and then passed in. So I'm going to be setting that from the parameter. So that's a constructor for this. When this TypeScript object is created, that's going to be called. It's going to force us to pass that in and force us to assign it to that. So that's fine. That's initialized in the constructor. The card map is just going to start out as an empty object. Let me just check that. Yep. So card map here, empty object. Lane map, empty object. I can get rid of this temporary thing here. Now there's going to be some sort of TypeScript compilers errors here. I think at this point, I could go through and just kind of look at each one here. But if I build it from here, I've got this set up so that I can hit Control-Shift-B, and that builds it. And it shows me all the problems. So I can literally, I've got a list of problems here that I can work through. Believe me, it looks worse than it is. Oh, maybe I don't need that. Okay. Before, when I told you add this colon, I don't know what I was thinking. That ain't necessary. See, I'm making my own work difficult for myself. Maybe I was thinking this was like a regular JavaScript object or something like that, but it's not. It's a TypeScript class definition. So that got rid of a bunch of issues. Now you can see there's a bunch of errors here. Cannot find named board. All I need to do here is change that to this. So the board is the this object. So I'm literally just working through the problems in the problem list here, changing those over. It's just taking a moment to get through all this. Almost there. Cool. So the interesting thing is that's this file is compiling. There's no errors in this file. I do have errors in my extension. There's one other thing I've got to do. I've got to make this, if this is still using the old board interface and just manually sort of configuring it, what I actually want to do here is I want to instantiate this from the board class, right? And I need to pass in the Markdown AST. That should be about it. Now, there's some changes I can make to improve this. Obviously, you know, we're kind of reaching in and we're modifying the internal state of this object. That's not great for encapsulation. I'd prefer to have some of this stuff be private inside the class, but I'm not going to have time to tackle that because I'm running out of time already. But I will come back. That is something I would like to come back and do later. So we're newing up an instance of the board. We've got all the functions attached to that, and we're returning that. Now what we're doing here is, now there's a bunch of functions here that are no longer explicitly exported, so we're removing those. We don't need to import those anymore. And all the places where we're using those global functions here in the extension, we've got to go and change those. So instead of passing in this current board, I've got to basically move that to here and call the function on that. But I've missed something here, so I'm still getting an issue with this. It's saying the add new lane does not exist on iBoard. I'm just hitting F12 to. Oh, that ain't going to work, but I can easily switch back anyway. So what I want to do here is I've got to put interfaces or definitions for all these functions in the interface. Now I would like to do that. Okay, let's just do that real quick, even though I'm running out of time. So I'm making these functions available on the interface itself. In fact, let's just, in the interest of speed, I'm going to copy and paste all this and then remove the bits that I don't need. So I'm directly going to basically just copy all these functions into my interface. Of course, you can't have function bodies in an interface, and I didn't want them there anyway, so I'm just deleting the function bodies. So just leaving the declarations of the functions, really. Now I'm working very quickly. I don't recommend necessarily that you work this quickly, especially if you're new to refactoring. I'd say, you know, work slowly, work as slowly as you can, and make sure you're not causing problems for yourself. Cool. So that add new lane is working now, and I can update the rest of these calls. My tests are probably going to be all broken at this point, but that'll be the next thing I do, is to get the tests working. So I would like to manually test this as well, like in terms of I don't have any TDD on the actual UI for this, so I'd like to actually run this. I'm not going to have time to do that today. Well, I'm going to try and run it in a second, but not to test it. I'm just going to hope that it works. Okay, so I've got no problems left. You can see down here, no problems have been detected. That's good. My tests aren't going to be working. Let's just check my tests. Before we look at the tests, I just want to say that if my tests were still passing, there's something drastically wrong with my tests. Like if my tests were still passing after this major change, I've done my TDD, I've done my testing badly. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. So, yep. We've got a bunch of failures here. What does it look like? Some did pass. So, I didn't break all the functionality, but I did break a significant portion of the... And now the aim is to get these tests working again. It should be fairly straightforward. Again, I've switched over to my tests here. I've got a list of errors. fixing these problems here is probably going to result in my tests working. So I'm removing the individual functions that were no longer being exported. So this is interesting. Sort of my mock data is no longer going to work here. I'm sort of what I'm sort of hoping. Oh no! What I need to do, I can still kind of hack this to work. It's not going to be that elegant, but what am I gonna? How am I gonna achieve this? No, I need to get rid of that for the moment. Actually, I'm jumping around here, hoping to get my tests working again. So what I'm going to do, what I like to do in this situation actually, I'd like to be able to focus on the one test, but I'm running out of time. So one thing I would do previously is do it.only, but that doesn't seem to work too well in Jest. Well, let's try it. Let's try it and see if that works. What this it.only will do will allow me just to kind of focus on this one test. Oh yeah, that's cool. I've had problems with that before with Jest, but that was in a different project, so maybe it's specific to that project. Anyway, so I'm focusing on this one test now. I'm only trying to run this one test. I'm just going to hack this data structure so that the lane map is set up the way I expect. With a bit of luck, that's going to get that test working. Not quite yet. Oh, I actually just deleted the function that I want to test. So that edit lane, that's what I actually want to test, and I deleted that. So that's not going to help, is it? So I just copied that. I'm adding that function back in, but this time I'm calling it on the board. Fingers crossed this will get my test to pass. Okay, what I'm going to do here, and this is a bit extreme. I just want to get some clarity on what's happening here. I am going to basically just delete all these other tests, right? Now, this is only temporary. I am not going to commit this change. In fact, I'm just going to for now. I'm just going to copy it into a separate file there so I can get it back. But I can always get it back. I can always get all my tests back using version control. I just really want to make sure I'm focusing on this one test, right? Cool. So you can see here I got that one test to pass. Now to get the other tests to pass, I basically follow that same strategy. Now I don't have time today because I'm running out of time. I'm going to finish that. Or I'm going to finish fixing these tests in between live streams. I'm going to go for another 10 minutes. I'm going to I promised some dependency injection. So let's see if I can do that in 10 minutes. It may not be possible, but at least we'll make a start on it. So I'm going to make use of dependency injection in the React app itself. So I'm just starting that into its own copy of Visual Studio Code. I'm going to enable the test data. Enabling the test data is sort of decoupling it from VS Code, so I can just run it from here. If I run npm run start dev, that's going to run the Webpack dev server. It's going to run the React application just so I can work with it. Let's just pull that into a tab of its own. While that's loading, let's drill down to the React app here. I'm going to install my own library, which is for dependency injection. You can find it, Code Capers Fusion. So you can find that on NPM. There's some instructions, basic instructions there on how to get it online. If you see my blog is the Data Wrangler. If you look at my blog, you'll actually see an article that shows you how to use this. So that's coming online. I've got my React app open here. Just making sure that there's no errors. So I've installed CodeCapers Fusion. Now I'm hoping to be able to use that. Now how do I want to use this? So previously the way this works is that it's got this thing called the interactor, if you can see it in the project there. Now that I've converted this project to TypeScript, I want to use a proper TypeScript class for this. I'm not going to call it interactor. Like this interactor thing, it's really just for the communication mechanism for sending messages between the Visual Studio Code extension and the web view. And it also this is like an abstraction. There's two versions of this, right? There's one that works in the browser, and there's one that works when you're running this inside of the VS Code extension itself. So the reason I can run this in the browser is because it's got like two different code paths, basically. One thing is I don't like the name of this interactor. I want to call this thing like VS Code API or something like that, because that's what it's there for. It's for communicating with VS Code. And I want to dependency inject this thing. I want to have it automatically created, and I want to have it dependency injected where it gets needed. So if we look at package.json, let's check that Fusion has been installed. Yep, I've got it here. So I got in my dependencies, I've got it version 1.0.5. Now I'm going to make a new class. I'm just going to put it directly under here. I'm going to call it VS Code API. Now I'm only going to sort of get started with this and just show you how this can work, and I'll properly flesh this out in the next session. So this is going to be, I'll have an interface for this. The interface is important because basically we want to supply two different implementations of this interface. We want to have one that works in the browser for convenient testing of the React app, and we want to have one that automatically works in Visual Studio Code. Now let's just assume for the moment that I'm only going to have one. That'll change probably in the next session. So I'm going to implement this interface, and let's just like I'm not going to have time to do this properly, so let's just add a function here that's like print message that does nothing. So I'm going to implement that in my class. Well, let's do an alert so it comes up front and center. Hello world. Now the idea here is that we want to implement this function differently depending on whether we're testing in the browser or depending on whether we're testing in Visual Studio Code. Now to do that I need to provide two different classes. So ultimately let's just get one here now. I'm probably not going to have time to set this up properly. Let's just call this browser, or no, mock. Let's call it mock. It's really a mock for testing, right? So mock VS Code API. So what I'm aiming to do here is to be able to automatically switch between two different implementations. I'm only going to be talking to the interface, but I want to switch between two different implementations depending on where I'm running it. What am I missing here? What's the quick fix to this problem? Did I spelled it wrong. Duh. Okay, let's get the spelling right. Anyway, I'm going to comment out the mock version. So that's what we're going to implement in the next session, and we'll implement the proper version of this. For now, I just want to dependency inject this into my React API, and hopefully this all runs smoothly. I've got my index component here. If you look down at the render function, this is where we're rendering the Kanban board. What I ideally want to do here is I just want to get my VS Code API dependency injected automatically here. Now, I'm not going to be implementing this assigning in the constructor. I could do it here, but I'm not going to do that. And because it's not being initialized manually anywhere, if I try and use it later, Visual Studio Code is going to complain about that. So what I do is put a little exclamation there, which sort of disables the checking of whether that's undefined. Now, we're going to basically just assume here that the dependency injection framework is automatically going to plug that in for us. Now, to plug it in, I've got to make an inject. I've got to inject it, give it the inject property command. So this comes from, if you look up here, this comes from CodeCapers Fusion. Now the dependency, I need to give it a dependency ID, and typically I will make that be a like a variable that actually comes from the file itself. And I typically just call it the name of the interface. Now I need to make sure that's included in my imports. What is it complaining about here? So I'm getting a warning here that experimental decorators need to be added to the TS config. So I'm just going to copy that out. I'm just going to enable that in my TS config. Make sure it's JSON compatible. And it's hopefully not going to complain about that anymore. So I'm injecting that. This is the command from the dependency injection framework to inject this property. I need to add to this class a decorator that says that makes it an injectable class. So that sort of primes it to be injected. And then to get a quick dependency injected, I can basically make this an injectable singleton. So that's automatically going to create this class, an instance of this class, when it's needed to satisfy this ID. So that should be all I need to do. Now to test that, what I'm going to do, I can't access my injected properties in the constructor. They're only available after that. So just to test this, I'm going to do a component did mount. So after it's mounted, after it's been injected, I'm just going to print the message. So now hopefully this thing will reload okay. So that's automatically popping up this message, hello world, because it's injected that object and it's calling the print message function on it. So in theory now I can implement this a separate version of this. I can implement this mock, and I can instead of having this be like a singleton that's always injected, I can switch between these two objects and inject the right object depending on how we're running. Whether we're running in test mode or whether we're actually running in the extension. But I'm well and truly out of time for today. So I'd just like to say thanks for watching. You've seen me do a little bit of refactoring today. I broke a bunch of tests. You could see that they were fairly easy to fix. I just didn't get time to fix them all in this session, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that before the next session. You also saw that I've brought a basic dependency injection into my React app. I've tested that it can work, that it can inject an object, and we're going to continue with that in the next session, and we're going to continue to get this refactored and get this whole project set up the way that I want. So thanks so much for listening. Hope everyone's staying safe, and I will see you all again in a week. Bye bye.